Hello everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video we're going to be going over the basics to the Red Mage job, which is coming out in Final Fantasy XIV's next expansion, Stormblood. Now the footage you're seeing here and the gameplay that I'm going to be talking about actually comes from my recent trip to the media tour for San Francisco, where I got my hands on Stormblood early. I didn't get to do too much, I had a lot to record, so there's probably going to be a few things off here and there, but keep in mind all the numerical things and whatnot, they're pretty much all subject to change all the way up to June 16th anyway. Any animations, any numerical values, any way abilities even interact with other skills, all that's subject to change, so don't take it as definitively this is how it will be, but at least this is what our idea is of it now. So Red Mage's core theme is to raise both their white and black mana in equal balance, expending them with swift melee strikes when the bar is raised high enough. Keep in mind you still have MP as a resource. White and black mana are an additional resource on top of your standard MP and TP. Now, one of the core aspects of Red Mage is that whenever a spell is cast, the next spell will have no cast time. This is called the dualcast ability, and basically it just means that every other spell you do is instant cast. So your basic spell is Jolt, which just does some damage. It's got slightly lower cast time than the global cooldown, and it's basically just used to proc dualcast. Jolt can also proc Impact, which allows you to cast that instead. Pretty much you only use Impact when you need to get a dual cast proc and you have an Impact proc waiting for you. So like I said, the goal is to raise black and white mana. How are you going to do that? Well, when you have these dual cast procs, you'll want to cast either Ver Thunder or Ver Arrow. So both of these abilities have super long cast times, but Ver Thunder raises your black mana, while Ver Arrow raises your white mana. Now each of them also has a chance of proccing another ability. For Ver Thunder, you have a 50% chance of proccing Ver Fire, and for Ver Arrow, you have a 50% chance of proccing Ver Stone. Basically, Ver Fire and Ver Stone are similar in all regards. They even have the same cast time as Jolt, but they deal more damage than Jolt and generate either black or white mana. Black mana for Ver Fire and white mana for Ver Arrow. And I know that the word Ver is going to be burned into your head by the time this video is done. So your basic rotation for Red Mage is heavily proc based. Let's just use Ver Thunder as an example in this one. You cast Jolt for the dual cast proc, and then you cast Ver Thunder. If Ver Fire procs, you'll use Ver Fire next. If Ver Fire doesn't proc, but Impact procs, you'll use Impact next. If neither procs, you return to Jolt. Now, even more confusing is when you consider what else happens if Ver Fire procs. If Ver Fire procs and you use Ver Fire, you will get a dual cast proc, in which case you can immediately go over into Ver Arrow and then follow the same rule set. It sounds super confusing, but ultimately it just comes down to a priority system, and it's not as complicated when you're playing as it is to say out loud. Again, I think it's just because I have to say Ver before everything. And you just want to alternate back and forth between Ver Thunder and Fire and Ver Arrow Stone until you've raised your black and white mana. You're trying to raise them at about the same rate, remember. And keep in mind that getting more procs for one type of mana may slightly throw off that balance. You just have to adjust a little bit. So once you've accumulated both 80 white and black mana, you need both of them to be above 80 at the same time. You're going to dash in with Core. Now this is a gap closing ability, but that's not its only function. It does do a bit of damage, so while you don't need to use Core if you're already in melee range, it does do some damage, so you might as well use it. Now that you're in melee range, you're going to quickly execute enhanced versions of Riposte, Zwerhu, and Redoublement. Those are so butchered. If you have at least 80 white and black mana when you do this combo, then all three skills will become enhanced, making them have significantly shorter global cooldowns. Enhanced Redoublement also procs both Ver Holy and Ver Flare. Now, while both of them are procced, casting one of them will completely remove the proc, so you can't cast them both back to back. You'll have to choose which one you want to cast. So how do you make that decision? Well, both have the same potency, but if you cast the correct one, then you'll instantly get a proc for Ver Fire or Ver Stone, depending on which you use. If your black mana is higher than your white mana, then you'll use Ver Holy to get a proc. If your white mana is higher than your black mana, you'll use Ver Flare. Now, I'm actually wondering what happens if you cast them both at the same value. I think if you cast them both and they're both at the exact same value, then it's 100% regardless. Or maybe you don't meet the condition at all. I don't think that ever happened in my play session, now that I think about it. As I'm saying that, I watched the footage, and it actually is the very first thing that happens in this video. So I noticed that the very first thing that happened in the video is I started with 100, and they both fell to the same amount, and when I used Ver Flare, it didn't actually give me a proc. So I guess if they are the exact same value, you don't have a 100% chance at getting a proc. You still have a base chance of getting a proc, I think it's 30%, but you just lose your chance if they're exactly the same, so I guess flub it up a little bit so it's slightly different. Also, once you're done with the melee combo, you'll likely use displacement to jump back to range. Again, jumping back isn't necessary. If you just want to stay in melee range, you're more than welcome. But displacement does do damage, so it's a potency loss if you aren't using it. Now, in terms of AoE for Red Mage, they pretty much have two abilities that they use for AoE. They have the Scatter spell, which generates both black and white mana and does some AoE. It also sometimes grants bonus black and white mana, so sometimes it generates it a little faster. And then you have Moulinet, which is a melee attack, and I know it's butchered, I'm so sorry. And that's a resource-eating AoE. Without enough white or black mana, it's pathetic. When enhanced with at least 30 black and white mana, it does a bit more damage. In terms of off-global cooldowns they can use, they have Fletch. Oh god, it's so bad, my pronunciation. Range single target, 25-second cooldown, and Contre Sixte. So sorry. Ranged AoE, 45-second cooldown. Speaking of cooldowns, they have some offensive cooldowns, and they have some raid utility in their cooldowns as well. So the first one they have is Acceleration, which ensures that their next Ver Thunder or Arrow will trigger their respective procs. 35-second cooldown, so it's good for ensuring some bonus potency and generation of mana, and it's pretty frequent. Manification is another one which doubles all of your current mana values. Basically, using it when both manas are at least 40 will double them to 80, making the Red Mage ready to dash in for the melee combo. Now, just to make sure you're ready to dash in, it also resets the cooldowns of Core and Displacement, just to make sure that they're off cooldown. Because you're doubling your mana, there's a good chance those two abilities aren't available yet again, so this is just playing the fact that it's doubling your MP, you should be able to have your Gap Closer and your Gap Creator back off cooldown. The final big one was actually translated on Reddit, and yes, it is exactly how it was translated. Embolden raises the Red Mage's magic damage dealt by 20% for 20 seconds, and nearby party members' physical damage dealt by 10% for 20 seconds. Now, every 4 seconds, 20% of that buff is lost. So after 4 seconds, it goes down to 16% magic damage and 8% physical damage, etc., etc. This makes this move ideal because it says that the Red Mage's is just magic damage, so it's most ideal to use it right after finishing a melee combo, so you can have the full buff for Verholy and Verflare, whichever you choose, and then move into the rest of your magic spells. That's how I imagine it being used, at least. As for other abilities, this first one blows my mind. So we've spent an entire 2 expansions making fun of Tribind and Freeze for their uses outside of PvP. They've had their moments to shine, but now Red Mage has an equivalent to that. Tether binds all nearby enemies. I mean, it literally is the same as a Tribind. It hits a target and then binds everything around it. And I'm seeing a lot of these heavy bind knockback stuff in kits. So it might be possible that this stuff is more useful in the expansion, but I mean, this is literally just like Tribind. Cost MP has a hard cast time, sits on the GCD. It's Tribind, but for Red Mage. So hopefully that's useful. They also have Vercure. Yes, they gave Red Mage a cure. It's basically the equivalent of, you know, Black Mage cross-classing Physic back in 3.x. It still scales with mine. It's got a super low potency. You're not a healer. Don't do it. Maybe you can be the hero and save the tank when everybody is, you know, dying left and right and you're trying to wait for the healer to take the res or something, but you're not a healer, please. Speaking of raising, you also have Ver-Raise. It's a combat res. Finally, we move into the caster crossroll. Now, there is quite some utility in here. You have Addle, which is the int/mind part of Virus. They took the physical part and sent that over to the melee crossroll. You have Break, which is damage plus a heavy effect. You have Drain, which is damage plus a self-heal. You have Diversion, which is a Quelling Strikes. And then you have Lucid Dreaming, which is basically Shroud of Saints. That reduces your current enmity, or cuts it in half, and gives you some MP generation. I can't see a universe where casters take both Diversion and Lucid Dreaming. Like, Quelling Strikes is good for a different reason. It's good for, like, the big burst. But if you just time Lucid Dreaming with your big burst and cut your enmity in half, that could work in theory. I'm just wondering if the enmity generation is going to be so high that cutting it in half at that point, you know, is not cutting a very big value in half. It's like saying that with Quelling Strikes you'll generate over 1,000 enmity, you'll only generate 500. But with Lucid Dreaming, if you don't use it by the time that you're at 300 enmity, then, you know, it's not going to be good for you. So you basically only shred 150 enmity. I'm curious to see how it ends up working out in terms of the PvE landscape. You have Swiftcast, which still works as it did back before. It's one thing worth noting, though. Swiftcast removes cast times from your ability. So if you use Swiftcast on an ability, I don't believe you'll get a dualcast proc. Dualcast needs to proc off abilities that are hard casted. So keep that in mind if you're going to use it. You also have APOC, which is the same as it was before. You have Mana Shift, which allows you to give 20% MP to an ally. Sorry, Black Mages, I'm leaving that to you. You have Surecast, which was buffed to also prevent some forms of CC for 10 seconds, and Erase, which allows you to remove dots from an ally, but not yourself. So overall, Red Mage was a lot of fun. It wasn't as complicated as I thought it was going to be. It's a lot to take in all at once when you're just thrown onto a level 70 character, and you're just like, yeah, go for it. But honestly, I didn't think it was that complicated to figure out. I mean, it seemed like Yoshi P already had the full rotation down. He walked over to me, and I was still trying to figure it out. I had only been on it for a couple minutes, and one of my manas was way higher than the other. And he walks over right time. He goes, not balanced. And I was like, are you saying the job's OP? And he's like, no. White mana, black mana, not balanced. And I was just like, yeah, I know, I screwed up. I'm sorry, Yoshi P. And so, I mean, it seems very easy to get into, and then it also has a very unique play style. So I'm curious to see how the player base actually responds to it. It's got some pretty decent utilities, and it's got a fun play style. So I'm looking forward to Red Mage. I think a lot of people will enjoy it, and you know, I hope you're looking forward to it on June 16th. But on that note, that's going to be a wrap for this video. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and stay tuned for all the latest Stormblood information, news, guides, everything you want. I got it. Until next time, everyone, take care.